All right. Hello there. This is Kaya again for part two. I'm sorry that I didn't talk fast enough, but here we go. So I just mentioned uh, the last two of my four uh, literature pieces that I've been reviewing. And now let's talk about the research, what I did. So, like I said, I used my first grade class, and at the time that I started this study, this research in um, February, I had 22 first grade students. I still have 22. 12 of them are boys and 10 were girls. The only difference between then and now, well, there are a few, I shouldn't say the only, there are 14 7-year-olds and 8 6-year-olds. We have had a few other birthdays since then, 3 to be exact. We've had 2 male students move away, replaced with 2 new male students. So I still have 22. Of the 2 that moved away, one of them had an IEP, one did not. And of the 2 new students that arrived, um, uh, one of them has an IEP and one of them is in the middle of the RTI process. He had an SST at his previous school and is still in the process. And so of those 22 students as well, 90% of them are from Mexico and 10% are considered other. We are very close to the border, so that's a pretty typical breakdown of a first grade class. The part that is atypical with this class is the number of students that are impacted by academic or behavior needs. There are 10 students in my class that are in the middle of the RTI process or that have been brought to team this year. 3 out of those 10 now currently have IEPs, and the other 7 are in the process. Of those 10, 1 is for behavior, 9 is for academic. And that's a pretty atypical mix-up in the sense that that's 45% of my class that's impacted. I've never had that as a teacher, and no other class at the school that I am at has a profile of students like that. So just keep that in mind, and I'll discuss that later in a few other elements of this study, but that is important. All right, so the instruments. So this is a quantitative qualitative study. And for the quantitative piece, you have the student survey, and then the DRA, the post-test reading assessment DRA. The survey was a scale-based surveys. I tried to make it a Likert scale, but for first graders, doing a 5 or 7-point scale proved to be very difficult. So it was scaled down to agree or disagree. Strongly disagree, moderately disagree, things like that proved to be very difficult. And considering 90% of my students are Mexican, of those students, all of them, Spanish is their first language. So I broke it down to just an agree or disagree scale for that survey. And then the developmental reading assessment, the DRA, that's a pretty set scale as well. There's the forms on it include the grading scale. So there isn't much in terms of interpretive options for grading. In terms of the qualitative piece, you have the KWL chart, which was done in whole class. And these were recorded conversations and note taking for the KWL whole class for the KWL chart. And then the reading assessment running records, those were done pre and post. And those, let me change this, pre/post. And the DRA was pre and post. The reading assessments are informal running records during guided reading groups, and those are informal in the sense that there are check marks on a page, but also they come with more observation notes. So there's less of a structured grading scale when I utilize running records during the guided reading timeframe. So again, this is a mixed method design. It's quantitative and qualitative. One whole group, which was one class, was pre-tested with both the attitude survey, the intelligence attitude survey, as well as the DRAs were already done at the time for district requirement grades. And then the students were given 6 specific growth mindset lessons, and then they were post-tested. So we were given the survey again, the post-test DRA, and then the running records. The reading groups are guided reading groups that are conducted daily within the class. Everything within the lessons were considered whole group. The only parts that I put on there that are the reading groups are the guided reading groups. It's small group based on homogeneous levels, homogeneous groups of reading levels. So it's based on if students are reading at an E, which would be a 6. I'm working with all students who are at a 6. The procedure that was taken, so from February up until April, the research was conducted, which would have been the survey, the running records, the pretest. The KWL chart was the first sort of a pre-assessment for growth mindset. It was really for me to understand what background knowledge the students had when it comes to growth mindset. Then there were 6 lessons. Of those 6 lessons, we included, it was guided after a workshop model. So we did a whole group mini lesson, and then we had chances for students to work independently or with partners or with whole group, depending upon what the lesson was. And we did things like read alouds from books such as The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes. We did vocabulary. I will say their favorite part of the vocabulary was neuroplasticity. That was our code word in the class for a long time. It was a focus for us, but it was essentially the part that the students needed to understand that your brains can grow. The neurons in your brains can get bigger, and they like the elasticity part, but it's like your muscles. So your brain can get big just like your muscles. And we focused that. The key word with that was neuroplasticity. Some of the activities that we included were building a paper airplane. They were given like a paper straw, a rubber band, and part of a 3x5 card and a model of an airplane. And they had to work together to figure out how to put it together. And they had to try different ways, ask for help, confer, a lot of different things that they would have needed to do essentially. And the only rule was that they couldn't give up. They couldn't stop. We also did different artistic activities with one color paint missing, things like that, which then led into reading a book with one word missing. So we were able to transfer the growth mindset activities from outside of the literacy content area to within the literacy content area. And then after our lessons and reading and all the activities, I did the post assessments, which included the running records, the DRAs, as well as the intelligence attitude survey again. Before I go into the results, I want to talk about the validity. This sort of goes back to the class makeup, but this was a big one. So for the internal threats to validity, we have the history. We have massive disruptions in first grade, and I didn't realize that until actually doing this research. But we have monthly drills. By the end of the month, we have to do either a fire drill, a lockdown drill, an earthquake drill. So every month we have a drill. And in the context of this study, we did 3. We have massive disrupted student behavior, considering we had 2 new students that came in. The 2 new ones both are students who struggle with social emotional needs. So we have a variety of disruptions there. We have, again, there's my 10 impacted students. We had spring break at the end of March, which really impacted behavior leading up to spring break. We have phone calls for speech pullout, all call announcements. We also, with the addition of the 3 IEPs, we have pullout hours. We have testing. The DRA 2 kit only offers 2 texts per level, and students became familiar with the books. The mortality, we have 2 students that moved away and 2 new students. External threats. Selection, treatment, interaction. So the random sampling error, I feel like this is the biggest one. 45% of the class is impacted and pending RTI. The multiple treatment interaction, again, this probably is equally as large. This, I'm doing growth mindset, impacting literacy, but at the same time, I'm still teaching shared reading, interactive read aloud, and guided reading mini lessons that are provided within the balanced literacy block. And then also my personal teacher bias during running records, because we're looking at quantitative and qualitative data. Any kind of teacher note taking or record keeping, I think for me, I would be remiss if I didn't say that bias didn't exist, because I'm pretty confident it does. So for the results, let's start with just sort of some of the raw data. The average DRA scores did increase. and the average running record scores did increase. They're still well below the grade level reading requirements. However, they did increase. The random sampling error impacts the results dramatically, since 45% of my participants are in the SST process. Students are also receiving the literacy instruction. And then also, to be perfectly honest, some of the data could not be used because of my error in creating the questions. For example, one of the questions on the survey was, I use the word wall when I encounter or come across a word I don't know. And every student, 100% of the students taking the survey said, well, yes, I do. So I think I could predict why they said that, but the reality is that's not good data. So let's look at the scores. Remember, I said they increased. You can see here the average score for the pre and post DRA scores went up. You can see how I coded them. Remember, there's an alpha and a numeric way to score these. The blanks here are my new students who came in reading at a level A or 0, and they did not increase that score. We have the running records, the pre and post running records. Again, there is an increase here. And again, we have our students with a 0. So there is a slight increase for these students as well. Again, the other part of the thing you have to keep in mind with this data, and this is some of the analysis piece, is that in a 6-week period of time, some of these students are going to increase just by the nature of their levels. So for example, some of these higher levels, they're going to increase because we're looking at comprehension rather than the need for more sight words or a particular phonics skill. The question 7 survey, I like reading at school, true or false. I wanted to look at whether or not the desire to read impacted their scores, and which led to question 8, which was I like reading at home. And again, looking at the desire to read impacting the scores. And I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. I'm going to talk faster. I included this correlation because Professor and I spoke about it. But quite honestly, I don't, based on this data, there isn't a tremendous correlation between enjoyment of reading and DRA scores. So for one, it's a negative 2.4, and this one, it's a negative 0. So the higher the enjoyment, the lower the DRA score. But again, I think part of that has to do with just the bad data. The other thing, which is what I asked our school psychologist later, in terms of the IEPs, there's several students with significantly low IQs that would not have understood the question the first time. So I think the majority of the survey data is not valid. For example, one of the IEPs, a little boy, he needs to have questions read to him 3 times before he's asked comprehension questions because of the auditory processing issues that he struggles with. Okay, let's take a look at the discussion. So fortunately, the textbook talks about the risk and the implication of analyzing data. So I would like to at least propose that there needs to be further research involving longer growth mindset instruction. 6 weeks is simply not sufficient of a time frame to introduce growth mindset and have it be meaningful towards literacy specifically. Also, a better balanced class. This 45% is an anomaly. Again, I think more time would be necessary for students to learn and develop growth mindset. The survey questions, I would almost dump out all of the survey questions and rewrite them because, again, the correlation percentage, the correlation number oddities, and then also 2 questions that had to be dumped out because everyone answered 100%. Yes, I do all these great things. The running records observations, interestingly, hindsight's 2020. I, of course, did running records based on miscues. I should have, in the future, I would look at running records as a tool to evaluate the number of strategies the student used during the struggling word. So keep track of how many different strategies they attempted rather than what was the miscue of the word. And then I really think everything comes back to Dweck of Stanford, and that even though I can't make any conclusive statements about this study, I can say that I believe, as Dweck believes, that we can connect mindset to behavioral patterns, and reading goals, such as those measured by these assessments, can be measured and attained. Oh, I have like 5 seconds. Keep going. Specific feedback. Next year I'll be teaching kindergarten and adjust my feedback to specific growth mindset. Like everybody learns and needs different things. Let's find out what you need. I like the way you tried this strategy during your reading. You put so much thought into your writing.